He was sold for $10, but no one there knew he had once been worth everything. The air inside the county shelter hung thick with disinfectant and quiet resignation, the kind that settled into your chest and stayed there long after you left. Rows of steel cages stretching under flickering fluorescent lights, each one holding a story no one had time to finish. And at the very end of the aisle, where fewer footsteps reached and fewer eyes lingered, lay a German shepherd with a coat dulled by time. His once rich sable now washed in gray, his body still, too still for a dog. His size, as if movement itself had become something he no longer trusted. A small paper tag clipped loosely to the gate read, "Retired K9, $10. The ink slightly smudged like even the words had lost conviction, and people passed him the way they pass old photographs in a box, a glance, a pause, then gone. Because it was easier that way, easier not to wonder who he had been before he became this quiet shape in a cage. Easier not to imagine the weight behind those amber eyes that no longer followed every sound, every scent, every shift in the air, but simply rested on the floor as though the world had already moved on without him. Outside, the wind brushed against the building in soft, restless breaths, carrying with it the distant hum of traffic and the faint smell of rain on warm asphalt, a reminder that life continued just beyond these walls, measured in miles and moments, not in seconds between footsteps that might stop and stay. And somewhere near the front desk, a bell chimed as the door opened, the sound sharp enough to ripple through the silence, but not enough to stir the shepherd at the end of the row, because he had learned that not every sound meant something. Not every arrival meant change. But this time, the footsteps were different, steady, unhurried, boots against concrete with a rhythm that didn't rush past or hesitate, a man moving like someone who had known both command and loss. Officer Daniel Hayes stepped inside, shoulders squared out of habit, more than necessity, his jacket carrying the faint scent of cold air and worn leather, his eyes scanning not with curiosity, but with something quieter, something searching without knowing exactly what it was looking for. He wasn't there for a dog. Not really. Just a stop on the way home. A favor to a colleague. Something simple, something forgettable. Yet as he moved down the aisle, past eager barks and hopeful tails, past paws pressed against metal and eyes that pleaded in ways words never could, he slowed without meaning to, because at the far end, there was no barking, no movement, just stillness, the kind that draws you in because it refuses to compete. And when Daniel's gaze finally settled on the shepherd, something shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible, like the first drop of rain before a storm you didn't know was coming. The dog didn't stand, didn't wag his tail, didn't make a sound, but his eyes lifted just enough to meet Daniel's, and in that brief, quiet connection, there was no plea, no performance, only recognition, as if somewhere beneath the silence, beneath the weight of whatever had been taken from him, the dog remembered something the rest of the world had forgotten, and Daniel felt it before he could explain it, a stillness that mirrored his own, a space where words didn't belong, only understanding. And for a moment, the noise of the shelter faded, the clatter, the voices, the endless cycle of coming and going, all of it dimmed into the background, leaving just a man and a dog who had both learned, in different ways, what it meant to be left behind, and neither of them moved. Not yet, because sometimes the most important moments don't begin with action, they begin with silence, and the quiet question hanging between them was not why the dog was only $10, but what had it cost him to become that. The man behind the counter did not look up right away, as if he had already decided that nothing at the far end of the shelter was worth interrupting his routine for. The slow scratch of pen against paper continuing for a few seconds longer before he finally glanced over, following the direction of Daniel's stillness rather than his voice. And when his eyes landed on the shepherd, there was a flicker of recognition that carried no warmth, only familiarity worn thin by repetition. He set the clipboard down with a quiet sigh and walked over, boots dragging slightly as though even this short distance required more effort than it should have. "That one has been here a while," he said, not unkindly, but without hope either, his tone carrying the weight of too many similar sentences spoken to too many people who had already turned away. Daniel did not respond immediately, his gaze still fixed on the dog whose eyes had not shifted, not even when the man approached. As if he had chosen his point of focus and refused to let it go. Retired police K9. The man continued, tapping lightly on the metal bar beside the tag. Came in a couple months ago. No family. No handler willing to take him back. Paperwork says he was difficult after his last assignment. He paused, searching for a word that would land softer, but finding none. They said he shut down. The word lingered in the air, heavy and incomplete, like it did not belong to something living. Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, not from disagreement, but from recognition, because he had heard that word before, used for people who came back from places no one else could see. People who stopped speaking not because they had nothing to say, but because there was no way to say it. The man shifted his weight and added, "He does not bark, does not respond to commands, barely eats unless you leave the bowl and walk away." Vet cleared him physically, but he gestured vaguely toward the dog, leaving the rest unsaid, because sometimes silence explained more than words ever could. Daniel finally stepped closer. The faint creak of the cage door hinges as he crouched just enough to lower himself into the dog's line of sight without towering over him, his hand resting loosely against his knee, not reaching, not forcing contact, just existing in the same space. A quiet offer rather than a demand. The shepherd's ears twitched once, subtle enough that someone not looking directly might have missed it, but Daniel saw it, the smallest fracture in the stillness, like a signal buried deep beneath layers of restraint. "What is his name?" Daniel asked, his voice low, measured, the kind of tone used in rooms where loud words did more harm than good. The man hesitated, flipping through a thin folder clipped to the side of the cage before answering. "Rex," he said, almost as an afterthought. "Used to be one of the best, or so they say. Explosives detection, search and rescue. Real sharp. Then something happened on a call. Details are vague. Department just listed him as unfit for duty after that." He shrugged lightly, as if the lack of detail made it easier to accept, easier to move on. But Daniel did not look away from the dog. "Unfit," he repeated under his breath, the words settling differently when spoken aloud, because it sounded less like a diagnosis and more like a verdict. Rex's eyes flickered again, just for a second, as if the sound of his own name had reached somewhere inside him that had not been touched in a long time. And for the first time since Daniel had walked into the shelter, the dog shifted. Not a full movement, not enough to stand, but enough to draw a slow breath that lifted his chest ever so slightly. The kind of movement that said something inside was still there, waiting, watching, deciding. The man behind the counter noticed it too and let out a quiet breath of surprise. "He does not usually do that," he murmured, but Daniel did not respond, because he was already somewhere else, somewhere between memory and instinct, where decisions were not made with logic, but with something older, something that recognized value where others saw none. And as he reached into his pocket, fingers brushing against a folded bill, the question was no longer whether the dog was worth $10, but whether leaving him behind would cost far more than he was willing to lose. The bill felt lighter than it should have in Daniel's hand. A single $10 note worn at the edges, the kind that passed through too many hands to remember where it had been. And yet in that moment it carried a weight that settled somewhere deeper than his pocket. He held it between his fingers for a second longer than necessary, not because he was hesitating, but because he understood that some decisions did not come with noise or urgency. They arrived quietly and stayed. The man behind the counter watched him with a look that hovered between curiosity and disbelief, as if he had seen people walk away from that cage 100 times, but never quite like this. "You sure about that?" he asked, not challenging, just confirming, the way someone does when they expect the answer to change. But Daniel did not look back, his eyes still on Rex, who had not moved again, as if that single breath had cost him more than it showed. "I am," Daniel said simply, placing the bill on the counter with a soft tap that echoed louder than it should have in the quiet room. Paperwork followed. Thin sheets slid across the surface. A pen offered. Names and signatures written in steady strokes that did not betray the shift already taking place beneath them. Outside, the sky had dimmed into a soft gray, the kind that promised rain without committing to it, the air pressing gently against the windows as if waiting. When the cage door finally opened, the hinge gave a low creak, unfamiliar and slow, like a door that had not been meant to open again. Rex did not rush forward, did not even stand. He remained where he was, eyes lifting just enough to track the movement, measuring it, questioning it. Daniel crouched again, this time a little closer. The distance between them reduced to something that could be crossed but not forced. "Come on, Rex," he said, his voice low, steady. Not a command, but an invitation. The word hung there, suspended between them, and for a long moment, nothing happened. The shelter breathed around them, distant barks rising and falling, the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the shuffle of the man stepping back to give space. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, Rex shifted his weight, one paw sliding forward against the concrete, hesitant, deliberate, as if each inch required permission from something deeper than instinct. His muscles trembled slightly, not from weakness alone, but from the unfamiliar act of choosing to move. Again, Daniel did not reach out, did not rush him. He simply stayed where he was, grounded, present, allowing the moment to unfold in its own time. Another step followed, then another, until Rex stood fully. For the first time, his frame taller than it had seemed inside the cage, lean but still carrying the structure of strength beneath the wear, his head lowered, ears angled back, not in fear but in caution, like a soldier stepping into a room he no longer trusted. When he finally crossed the threshold, the air seemed to shift with him, subtle but real, as if the space itself acknowledged the change. The leash hung loosely from Daniel's hand, and used, because there are moments when control is not what matters, trust is, and trust does not come from pulling. It comes from waiting. Rex paused just outside the cage, turning his head slightly, as if looking back at the place he had been left, the place that had held him without asking who he used to be. And for a brief second, his eyes lingered there, not with attachment, but with something closer to closure. Then he turned forward again, aligning himself beside Daniel without being asked, not close enough to touch, but close enough to stay. The man behind the counter let out a quiet breath, shaking his head in disbelief. "He has not walked out like that for anyone," he murmured, but Daniel did not respond, because he felt it too. The shift, small but undeniable, like the first crack in ice that had held too long. As they stepped toward the door together, the bell chimed again, softer this time, blending with the low rumble of distant thunder, and outside, the world waited, wide and uncertain, measured in miles and choices yet to be made, but for the first time in a long while, neither of them stood still inside it. The first drop of rain hit the pavement just as they stepped outside, a soft, hollow tap that echoed against the quiet parking lot, followed by another, then another, until the sky finally gave in and released a steady curtain that blurred the edges of everything beyond the shelter walls. Daniel did not rush, did not pull his jacket tighter or quicken his pace. He simply walked, measured and calm, toward the old pickup truck parked beneath a flickering street lamp, its light casting long, uneven shadows across the wet asphalt. Rex followed a few steps behind it first, his paws touching the ground with careful precision, each movement deliberate, as if the open space around him was something unfamiliar, something too wide to trust all at once. The sound of rain against metal, against glass, against the distant hum of tires on the highway, filled the silence between them, but it was not empty. It was waiting. Daniel reached the truck and opened the passenger door slowly, the hinge groaning slightly, a familiar sound that carried no urgency. He stepped back, giving Rex space, not pointing, not commanding, just offering. The interior of the truck smelled faintly of worn leather, motor oil, and something older, something lived in, a place that had seen quiet miles and long nights. Rex stopped just short of the open door, his body still, ears angled slightly forward now, catching every detail. The rain, the engine ticking as it cooled, Daniel's steady breathing. His eyes moved once, scanning the inside of the vehicle, then back to Daniel, as if asking a question without words. And Daniel answered the only way that mattered, by waiting, by not filling the silence with pressure. Seconds stretched, marked only by the rhythm of rain and the distant roll of thunder, until finally, Rex shifted forward, placing one paw onto the edge of the truck, then the other, climbing in with a careful, controlled motion that spoke of training long embedded beneath everything else. He settled onto the seat without circling, without hesitation, but not fully relaxed either. His body held a quiet tension, like a coiled spring that had forgotten how to release. Daniel closed the door gently, the sound soft but final, and moved around to the driver's side. The rain soaking through his jacket now, cold against his skin, but he did not seem to notice. When he slid into the seat and started the engine, the low rumble filled the cab, steady and grounding. Windshield wipers came to life with a rhythmic sweep, clearing just enough of the storm to see the road ahead. For a moment, neither of them moved, the truck idling. The world outside blurred into streaks of gray and amber light. Daniel rested his hands loosely on the wheel, then glanced sideways. Rex sat facing forward, eyes alert but distant, as if watching something beyond the glass, something only he could see. The faint reflection of passing headlights flickered across his face, highlighting the lines of age, the quiet strength still present beneath them. Daniel reached slowly into the center console and pulled out a small object, a worn metal tag attached to a simple chain. It caught the dim light for a second before settling into his palm. He turned it once between his fingers, then placed it gently on the dashboard, not offering it, not explaining it, just letting it exist there, a silent piece of something shared between those who had worn purpose like a uniform. Rex's gaze shifted, just slightly, the movement almost invisible, but it landed on the tag, held there for a breath longer than before, and something in his posture softened. Not much, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough to mark a beginning. Daniel exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible beneath the hum of the engine, and shifted the truck into drive. The tires rolled forward through shallow puddles, water parting beneath them, carrying them away from the shelter, away from the place that had held what was left of a story unfinished, and into a night that did not promise anything except distance, and sometimes distance was enough to start again. The road stretched ahead in long, quiet miles, the kind that seemed to exist outside of time, where the only markers were the rhythmic sweep of windshield wipers and the soft hum of tires rolling over wet asphalt. The storm did not rage. It lingered, steady and patient, like something that had nowhere else to be. Streetlights passed in intervals, casting brief halos of amber that slid across the windshield and disappeared just as quickly, leaving behind darkness that felt less like absence and more like space. Inside the truck, the air carried a low warmth from the heater, slowly pushing back the chill that had followed them from the shelter. Daniel drove with both hands resting lightly on the wheel, his posture relaxed but attentive, the kind of stillness that came from years of learning how to stay present without forcing control. He did not speak, not because there was nothing to say, but because silence had its own language, and some things were better understood without interruption. Beside him, Rex remained upright, his body aligned forward, but not rigid, not anymore. His breathing had steadied, no longer shallow, no longer guarded, each inhale deeper than the last, as if the simple act of moving through space had begun to loosen something that had been held too tightly for too long. His eyes tracked the passing lights, the faint reflections dancing across the glass, but every now and then, almost without intention, they shifted toward the dashboard, toward the small metal tag resting there, catching glints of light with each turn of the wheel. It was not shiny, not polished, just worn, edges softened by time and touch, the kind of object that carried memory without needing to explain it. Daniel noticed the glance, not directly, but in the way one becomes aware of small changes without looking for them, and he let it be, because recognition did not need to be acknowledged to be real. Miles passed. The town thinned into stretches of open road, fields dark and quiet beyond the shoulder. The rain softened into a mist, lighter now, less insistent, until it became little more than a whisper against the glass. Daniel slowed as he turned off the main road onto a narrower path, gravel crunching beneath the tires. The truck easing forward toward a small house set back from the road, its porch light casting a soft, steady glow that cut through the night like a quiet promise. It was not large, not new, but it stood with a kind of quiet permanence, as if it had learned how to endure without needing to be noticed. Daniel pulled the truck to a stop and let the engine idle for a moment longer, neither of them moving, as if the transition from one place to another required more than just distance. He reached forward and turned the key, the engine settling into silence, the sudden stillness filling the cab in a way that made every small sound more distinct. the ticking of cooling metal, the faint rustle of fabric as he shifted, the distant call of something unseen in the night. He opened his door slowly, stepping out into the damp air, the scent of wet earth rising up around him, grounding and familiar. Then he walked around to the passenger side and opened the door for Rex. Again, no command, no leash pulled tight, just space offered. Rex did not hesitate this time. He stepped down onto the gravel with a quiet confidence that had not been there before, his paws steady, his posture more aligned, not fully at ease, but no longer withdrawn. He stood for a moment, taking in the new environment, the house, the faint creak of the porch as it shifted under its own weight, the distant trees swaying gently in the night breeze. And then, almost as if guided by something deeper than instruction, he moved forward, following Daniel up the short path toward the front door. The porch light reflected in his eyes, not distant anymore, not empty, but present, aware. Daniel paused at the door, his hand resting briefly on the handle. Then he glanced down, just for a second, meeting Rex's gaze. And in that quiet exchange, there was no question, no command, just a shared understanding that whatever came next would not be given. It would be built, step by step, breath by breath, in the spaces where trust slowly learns how to live again. The door opened with a soft click that echoed gently into the quiet house, a sound that felt less like an entrance and more like the beginning of something that had been waiting. Daniel stepped inside first, not turning on the overhead lights, only reaching to switch on a small lamp near the wall, its warm glow spreading slowly across the room, revealing simple furniture, a worn couch, a wooden table with faint scratches that told their own quiet history, and a space that felt lived in but not crowded, the kind of place where silence did not feel empty, just present. He stepped aside without a word, leaving the doorway open behind him, and Rex stood there for a moment, framed by the dim porch light and the soft warmth inside, his body still, ears angled forward, taking in every detail, the scent of wood, of old fabric, of something steady and human, not rushed, not sharp, just there, his paw lifted slightly, hesitating at the threshold as if the line between outside and inside carried more meaning than it should. Daniel did not look back, did not call him. He simply moved a few steps further into the room, placing his keys down with a quiet clink, the small sounds of routine filling the space in a way that felt intentional, grounding. Rex watched, the stillness inside him not gone, but shifting, softer now, less guarded, and then slowly, almost cautiously, he stepped forward, crossing the threshold with a quiet certainty that did not ask permission. The door remained open for a moment longer before Daniel reached back and closed it gently, sealing the outside world away. The rain now reduced to a distant murmur against the walls. Inside, the air held warmth, steady and calm. Daniel walked toward the kitchen area, movements unhurried, pulling a metal bowl from a cabinet and setting it on the floor, then filling it with water, the sound of it pouring clear and simple, nothing hidden in it, no expectation, just an offering. He placed it a few feet away and stepped back, giving space, always space. Rex did not rush to it. He stood where he was, watching, measuring, his body no longer rigid but still careful, as if each choice carried weight. His gaze shifted from the bowl to Daniel, then back again, and after a long moment, he moved, one step, then another, until he reached the edge of the bowl, lowering his head slowly, cautiously. The first sip was small, almost testing, but then another followed, and another, until the rhythm found him, the simple act of drinking becoming something steady, something real. Daniel leaned lightly against the counter, arms resting at his sides, watching without staring, present without pressing. After a few moments, he turned and opened the refrigerator, pulling out a container, preparing food with the same quiet care, setting it down near the water, again stepping back. Rex lifted his head, droplets falling softly back into the bowl, his ears twitching at the sound, his eyes shifting again toward Daniel, not searching, not questioning, just noticing. He approached the food slower this time, his movements deliberate, controlled, but when he began to eat, it was not rushed, not desperate, it was measured, as if he had relearned how to take what was given without expecting it to disappear. The room held that quiet moment without interruption, no sudden noise, no demand, just the steady presence of two beings learning the shape of a shared space. When Rex finished, he did not retreat, did not move away into a corner. Instead, he stood there, looking around the room, the couch, the lamp, the door now closed, and then finally, he lowered himself to the floor, not far, not close, just within reach of the light. His body settling in a way that suggested not complete comfort, but the beginning of it. Daniel watched for a moment longer before walking to the hallway, returning with a folded blanket, placing it gently near the spot where Rex had chosen to lie, not touching him, not adjusting his position, just offering something soft beneath him. Rex's eyes followed the movement, the blanket, the hand, the distance kept, and for the first time since leaving the shelter, his body shifted not from caution, but from choice. As he lowered his head onto the fabric, the weight of it grounding him, his breathing slow, steady, the room quiet except for the faint ticking of a clock somewhere deeper in the house. And as the night settled around them, there was no miracle, no sudden transformation, only something smaller, something quieter, the first fragile thread of trust, laid gently between them, not pulled tight, not forced, just there, waiting to be held. Morning did not arrive all at once. It came slowly, like light remembering how to return, the first pale gray slipping through the edges of the curtains, touching the walls, the floor, the quiet shape of the room that had held its breath through the night. Daniel was already awake, not fully, not moving, just aware, the kind of stillness that comes from years of rising before the world asks you to. He sat at the edge of the couch, elbows resting on his knees, hands loosely clasped, listening. Not for noise, but for absence of it. The rain had passed, leaving behind a faint scent of wet earth drifting through a slightly open window. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called once, then again, testing the silence. Rex had not moved much during the night, but he had not retreated either. His body still rested on the blanket, the rise and fall of his breathing steady. Deeper now, less guarded, one ear twitched at the sound of the bird, then settled again, as if the world outside was no longer something to brace against, but something to observe. Daniel stood slowly, careful not to break the quiet more than necessary, his steps soft against the wooden floor as he moved toward the kitchen, the familiar rhythm of routine beginning. Again, water running, the faint click of a stove, the low hum of a coffee maker filling the space with a gentle presence, not loud, not sharp, just there. Rex's eyes opened before he lifted his head, awareness returning in layers rather than all at once. He did not startle, did not rise quickly. He simply watched, the same way he had in the shelter. But this time, there was something different in it. Not distance, not detachment, but attention. Daniel moved without looking back, not ignoring, just trusting the space between them. When he set the bowl down again, the sound was familiar now, a quiet signal that did not demand a response. Rex shifted, his body stretching slightly before he stood, the stiffness of rest easing from his limbs as he took a few steps forward, not hesitant this time, not measuring each inch, just moving. He drank first, steady, then paused before the food, glancing once toward Daniel. A brief moment, but enough. Daniel met the glance without holding it, then returned to his coffee. The exchange small, almost invisible, but it carried weight. After eating, Rex did not return to the exact same spot. Instead, he moved closer, not close enough to touch, but closer than before, settling near the edge of the room where the light from the window fell across the floor, his body angled slightly toward Daniel. Not fully, not yet, but enough to suggest orientation, awareness, connection. The morning continued without urgency. Daniel sat at the table, a folded newspaper untouched beside him, his coffee cooling slightly as he stared at nothing in particular, or maybe it's something far beyond the room, something that lingered in memory the same way certain silences do. Rex watched him, not with curiosity, not with confusion, but with a quiet recognition, as if he understood that stillness in a way few could. Time passed in small increments, marked by the shifting light, the faint creak of the house settling, the distant sound of a car passing on the road, and then it happened, not with sound, not with movement that demanded attention, but with something softer. Rex stood, walked the few steps that separated them, and stopped beside Daniel's chair. Close enough now that the space between them no longer felt like distance. He did not push, did not nudge. He simply stood there, steady, present, and after a moment, slowly, deliberately, he lowered his head, resting it lightly against Daniel's hand. The contact brief at first, almost testing, but real, unmistakably real. Daniel did not react immediately, did not pull away. His fingers remained still for a second, then shifted just enough to acknowledge the weight, the warmth, the presence. No words were spoken, none were needed, because in that small, quiet gesture, something had crossed over, something that could not be undone, not trust fully formed, not healing complete, but the beginning of both, fragile and steady all at once, like light returning after a long night, not all at once, but enough to see where to step next. The day moved forward in quiet layers, sunlight slipping further into the room, warming the wooden floor in soft patches that shifted with the passing hours, and for the first time, the house did not feel like a place holding silence. It felt like a place learning how to breathe again. Daniel stood near the sink, rinsing his cup slowly, the sound of water steady and unhurried, while Rex remained close, not at his feet, not following every step, but within the same space, his presence no longer distant, no longer uncertain, just there, like something that had decided to stay without needing to prove it. Outside, the sky had cleared into a pale blue, the kind that stretches wide and open, carrying the faint promise of a day that asks nothing except to be lived. Daniel reached for his jacket, pausing for a brief second as his fingers brushed against the fabric, a habit more than a thought. Then he moved toward the door, not looking back, not calling, simply opening it and stepping onto the porch. The air outside carried the scent of damp earth and sun-warmed wood, a quiet contrast to the night before. Rex appeared at the doorway a moment later, stopping just inside, his body framed by the shadow of the house and the brightness beyond. His ears lifted slightly, catching the distant sounds. A car passing far off, wind moving through trees. Something unseen shifting in the grass. He did not rush forward, did not retreat. He simply stood there, taking it in, and then, without hesitation, he stepped out, Paws touching the wooden boards of the porch with a calm certainty that had not existed the day before. Daniel walked down the short steps, gravel crunching beneath his boots as he moved toward the open yard, the space wide but not overwhelming, bordered by a line of trees that stood like quiet witnesses. Rex followed, a few steps behind at first, then closing the distance slightly, not out of need, but out of choice. They moved without direction, no command, no leash, just two figures sharing the same path without needing to define it. The morning unfolded around them, light shifting, shadows stretching, the quiet rhythm of a place untouched by urgency. Daniel stopped near the edge of the yard, his gaze fixed on something beyond the trees, something not visible but present in the way memory often is. Rex stood beside him now, not behind, not separate, his posture steady, his breathing calm, and for a moment, they both remained still, not waiting, not expecting, just existing within the same quiet space. Then something changed, subtle, almost invisible. Rex's head lifted slightly, his ears angling forward, his body adjusting in a way that spoke not of fear, but of awareness. A sound carried through the air, faint, distant, something most would not notice, but it reached him, and with it came a shift, not outward, but inward, something waking, something remembered. His muscles did not tense, they aligned, his stance becoming more grounded, more certain, as if the world had suddenly come back into focus in a way it had not before. Daniel noticed it without turning, the change in posture, the quiet alertness that moved through the dog like a current, and he did not interrupt it, did not call it back or question it, because some instincts are not taught, they are remembered. Rex took a slow step forward, then another, his gaze fixed ahead, not searching blindly, but following something precise, something familiar. His nose lifted slightly, catching the air, reading it the way he once had, the way he had been trained to. But this time, there was no command guiding him, no expectation waiting at the end, just the quiet pull of something that mattered. Daniel remained where he was, watching now, not with concern, but with understanding. As Rex moved a few yards ahead, stopping near the base of a tree where the ground had been disturbed slightly by the rain, his posture still, focused, then slowly, he lowered his head, not digging, not reacting with urgency, just observing, processing, the way a mind works when it begins to trust itself again. The moment stretched, held between what was and what could be, and then Rex stepped back, turning his head slightly toward Daniel, not seeking approval, not asking for instruction, just sharing the moment, the awareness, the quiet return of something that had never truly been lost, only buried beneath time and silence. And in that exchange, without words, without movement that demanded recognition, Daniel understood, not everything, not the past, that shaped it, but enough to know that the dog beside him was not broken, not empty, but waiting for the right moment, the right place, to remember who he had always been. The moment did not end when Rex stepped back from the tree. It lingered, stretching quietly into something deeper, something that settled into the space between him and Daniel like a truth neither of them needed to explain. The wind moved softly through the branches above, carrying with it the scent of earth and leaves, and something faintly familiar, something that did not belong to fear or urgency, but to memory. And Rex stood there, no longer searching, no longer uncertain, his posture steady, his gaze clear, as if the world had finally aligned in a way that made sense again. Daniel took a slow step forward, closing the distance without breaking the quiet, his boots pressing gently into the damp ground. Each step measured, not to approach, but to meet. And when he reached Rex, he did not speak, did not reach immediately. He simply stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder, both of them facing the same direction, sharing the same horizon. And for a long moment, that was enough, the silence. Between them no longer empty, but full, carrying the weight of everything that had been lost and everything that was beginning to return. Rex shifted slightly, not away, but closer, his presence solid now, grounded, no longer fragile, no longer held together by hesitation, but by something stronger, something chosen. Daniel finally lowered his hand, resting it gently along the side of Rex's neck, not gripping, not guiding, just there, a steady contact that asked for nothing and gave everything. Rex did not flinch, did not pull away. Instead, he leaned into it, just slightly, enough to say yes without words, enough to close the distance that had once felt impossible. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting soft patterns across the ground, across their still forms, and in that quiet moment, something unseen shifted, not dramatically, not in a way that demanded attention, but in a way that mattered. The kind of change that does not announce itself, but stays, the kind that rewrites what comes next without erasing what came before. Daniel exhaled slowly, the tension he had carried without noticing easing from his shoulders, and for the first time, he allowed himself to stand without bracing for something more, without expecting the silence to break into something he could not control. Beside him, Rex lifted his head, eyes scanning the distance once more, not with the urgency of duty, but with the calm awareness of something that understands its place again, not as a tool, not as something used and set aside, but as something that belongs, something that matters. And when he turned his gaze back to Daniel, there was no question in it, no hesitation, just a quiet certainty. That did not need to be spoken. They stood there a while longer, the world moving gently around them, time passing in soft increments marked only by light and shadow. And then, without signal or command, Daniel turned toward the house, his steps unhurried, trusting, and Rex moved with him, not following, not trailing behind, but walking beside him, aligned, present, each step matching in quiet rhythm. As they reached the porch, the boards creaked softly under their weight, the door standing open behind them. And for a brief second, Rex paused, not from doubt, but from awareness, glancing once more at the yard, the trees, the place where something inside him had shifted. Then he stepped forward, crossing the threshold without hesitation, not because he had to, but because he chose to. And as the door closed gently behind them, the light of the morning settling into the space they now shared, there was no need for words, no need for promises, because some stories do not end in victory. They end in something quieter, something steadier. They end in grace.